All right, let's see if this is live and working. Yep, brilliant. Wonderful. Well, welcome to Sticky Notes, where one of us at the user story once every other week on a Friday at 12:30, right ready for your last lunch break of the week, prepares a little topic to talk about something we find interesting usually in connection with our work. Today's topic is beautiful Miro boards. Now, that might not seem too interesting to some people, but it is to me, and it should be to you. So, without further ado, let's jump in. I've prepared something here, which is a board to kind of guide you through a couple of aspects of beautiful Miro boards. And the first topic I want to touch on is perception. So, this is largely based on the Gestalt principles or Gestalt laws. Gestalt, Gestalt, being a German word meaning form or shape. And this largely revolves around sort of how we as humans perceive visually. And the first law I want to go into here is the law of proximity. So we generally perceive items which are closer to each other in relation to others as a group. And as you can see on the top grouping here, you can't really make out much. Whereas on the bottom one, you may be able to spot, depending on how you view it, between 4 and 6 groups. So this is one to keep in mind for later. This helps really very much with sort of the thematic grouping of items, for example. And this is probably the one that comes the easiest to most people and that is the most intuitive to understand. Next up, we have continuity. So we perceive items as connected if they are in sort of a relation to each other, if they are connected visually or if they follow a trajectory. You can see this in the top example here. Each of these pairs of sticky notes looks connected, even though the lines are in part broken up in between. We perceive them as following a trajectory and thus as belonging to one item. Next, when we connect things, it might be a little bit difficult to see, depending on how we connect them, which line follows through to which object, or if these are just all connected together. If we use a different style of connection, even though the lines are maybe a little bit less obvious, you can, by increasing the angle at which these lines meet each other, the clarity of this connection. And going even further, with a different style of connection still, you see we have an even steeper angle where they connect, and it is easier to follow through to see which line goes to which sticky note. The next item on our list is the common domain. So if we see sort of an area marked out and there are items in said area, even if they are closer to other items outside of that area, we perceive them as part of a group within that area. You can see a couple of examples here with varying degrees of sort of visibility of the area marked out. And we can also use this to organize items together. Next up, we have the principle of similarity. Generally speaking, we will perceive items which are similar to be more cohesive than other items, even if they are closer. So you can see we have the same grouping as earlier. If we move down and look at this one, you can see there is a group of stickies that stands out here, the blue ones. Even though they are quite far removed, you perceive them as a unity more so than the other ones scattered around. And we have two more which are related to an extent. We have closure, meaning that we kind of try to fill in forms and trajectories. This is quite similar to continuity as well. So you can see, even though all of these are very disconnected, they resemble sort of an underground sign. And we have the prominent form, which states that we perceive the simplest shape that can be represented in any constellation. So you can see there's nothing really prominent here. But if I scroll down, there is, through the law of similarity, we can perceive a group of purple stickies which form a rectangle. Right, so this is sort of the very, very, very basics of visual perception, and we can use all of these insights in order to convey information on our Miro boards. But that alone doesn't make a Miro board beautiful yet, does it? We have another set, which I've called aesthetics. And the first set of these rules is symmetry. So the law of symmetry states that if items are symmetrical and evenly spaced, we perceive them as more beautiful, and it is in turn also easier for us to sort of perceive, to process the information that they convey, or that is presented to us visually. You can see the top ones are a little bit irregular, a little bit scattered all over the place, whereas the bottom ones are all evenly spaced. You can see also by that we have three clear groupings divided by a larger space in between them. Next up, we have the golden ratio. And I personally don't actually measure the exact ratio. I usually go with an approximation between 1 to 1.5 to 1 to 2. It works well enough, really. And it's not that important that you would have to measure that accurately. But we can use this in order to perceive, to change the perception of items as well, and sort of make the scale still appear cohesive and beautiful. So you can see the outer barrier of this shape is the same distance removed from this edge as these edges are removed from one another. Now, if we increase that to, said, roughly 1.5 to 2 times difference, we can change the perception of the elements within to be more cohesive. So you can see these are sort of evenly prominent, whereas here you perceive these two more as a single cohesive unit rather than separate items. Next up, we have roundness. Generally speaking, we perceive round shapes as friendlier, easier, less stressful. Also goes the theory anyway. And we can use this also to sort of try and highlight particular items, because those that are sharp will likely stand out to us more than those that are round. So we can drive focus using this as well. And lastly, we have space. You can see the top arrangement here looks a little bit crammed, it's a little bit constrained, and we typically don't really perceive this favorably, whereas if you do create a little bit of space around items, it is calmer, it is easier to focus on the items displayed. And a rule of thumb, particularly with round items that I use, is if you try and find the center point of the radius of this corner and start the contents there, that's more or less around there, is usually a good point to start to make things look a little more beautiful. But why? Why should we do this? I hinted before that it is easier to sort of perceive and process information if it is laid out beautifully. And beyond that, it has the added benefit of just things looking better, typically are perceived as more refined, more professional, and it can just in general improve everybody's experience at work, to try and make things just a little more beautiful, a little bit more easy to follow along, and it'll make things go more smoothly, at least I believe so. But this is all a lot of effort, and in order to make things a little bit easier to follow through on this, I have arranged a grouping of secret weapons you can use. The first and probably most important one of which are smart guides. So you can see we have sort of a diagram here, and the top one is a little bit, let's say, unruly. It just goes a little bit all over the place. And using smart guides, we can tidy this up very easily. So if I move this around, you can see there will be some dotted lines or interrupted lines that help me align these elements with one another. And by doing that, I can associate more even spacing between them. I can align them in height and like vertically and horizontally, essentially. I can center them under one another. And by doing that, I can very quickly, with little effort, sort of arrange them in a way that is more pleasant to look at. And while this is still a little bit of effort, it is decidedly less effort than if these weren't there. And before long, you see we have something that sort of resembles the more tidy picture below. Next up, we have the Shift key. So if you select one or multiple items and you move them around, they can or cannot, depending on how you move, be a little bit temperamental in aligning to certain smart guides. But if you hold the Shift key, this will align to sort of the strongest axis of movement within sort of 8 degrees of movement, and it'll help you more easily align them and move things about. Another one is the Alt-Option key, depending on whether you're on Windows or Mac. And we can use this in a host of different ways. So we can use it to duplicate items more easily. And in combination with the Shift key, we can also then move these along one axis. And by doing this, we have an easier time creating repetitive patterns, which, as we learned earlier with the law of symmetry, are perceived as more beautiful. Another thing we can do with the Alt-Option key is if we resize items, we can resize them around their center point, like so. And again, if we hold the Shift key alongside that, we can actually maintain the same ratios, the same scale that the item had before. So we can maintain this square, for example. And then lastly, and probably the most well hidden of these secret weapons, is the alignment tools. So if I select a group of stickies here to try and tidy it up more like the one below, you can see there is the Align Objects option here in the toolbar. You can align these horizontally, for example, and it'll put them in a nice line. If we repeat the same here, we then at least have 2 files, right? Select the top ones here. We can also align them at the top, these ones at the bottom. If we move these down a little bit to create some more space, select each row again and distribute them vertically. You can see that we very quickly have very nice, very tidy looking layout here. Right, so these are the 4 secret weapons I want to give you on your way to creating more beautiful Miro boards. And lastly, I've prepared a couple of examples. So this is for example, an introduction or an icebreaker exercise that I tend to use for workshops. You can see everything is aligned in a circle. It's very easy to there's even spacings, and it'll help, for example, very quickly by just pointing someone out to start and then saying, maybe we'll go clockwise with it. So everybody knows, okay, I'm next. I can sort of prepare my response. It's all a bit more relaxed. It's very clearly laid out, follows a clear structure. Everybody knows what to expect. And similarly here, you can also already line out colors, which you may have noticed. They are not very similar here, but they can be similar sort of across different frames and help us relate sort of votes to particular people, which may help in organizing and facilitating workshops. You can see also here that I've used similarity for the headlines. I've used sort of proximity for the groupings. And these are just a couple of ways you can implement more beautiful Miros with these rules laid out. And yeah, that is the lot. I have left the link to this board in the description, hopefully, if I've done everything right, so you can look at it yourselves and have a little play around with it if you copy it over to your own. And yeah, are there any questions regarding this anywhere?
Not at the moment, but there's a slight delay, so we'll give it a few minutes.
I'll let the stream catch up a little bit, see if we have any questions here. If not, I'll just wrap it up in about a minute or so.
I can ask the question to fill the time. Should I grab this?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, it's on. It should be on anyway.
Okay, so do you think workshopping is the only time you would use this with Miro? Or is there any other examples of when you might use this?
Oh, I use it on pretty much every Miro board. Workshops is one example where it kind of aids communication. But I, for example, also use this when I'm mapping out information architectures to make them easier to follow. Sort of use color coding for a legend to mark out, for example, interactive items in them. You can use it very easily as well to make flowcharts more easy to follow along with. And I think if you Google flowcharts right now, you'll find that most of them follow these kinds of principles, which are just sort of two more examples of how you can very effectively convey information by aligning it in a beautiful way. Another thing I do is when I collect sort of research insights, I tend to group them and organize the information there using these principles as well. And it helps me as much as others to try and understand the insights and communicate them.
Cool. I think that's it.
Well, we can't see any other questions right now. If there are any in the future, I will have a look later on and check back if there's any comments on LinkedIn or on YouTube. Until then, this has been Sticky Notes. We will see you again in 2 weeks on a Friday at 12:30. If you are so inclined, and thank you very much for tuning in and watching. This has been The User Story, and I hope you have a nice weekend.